Thank you, and thank you so much for being here. I know many of you, for those who I don't know, thank you for being here. My name is Roger Valenti, and tonight we're doing some storytelling. It's called Storytelling for Adults, but we won't be getting into a lot of, X-rated NG. It's storytelling for adults because we just want to have, a time for people to hear stories, get together. Stories you wouldn't necessarily do to a kid audience, but stories that, kind of go back to tradition that we can all enjoy. If you've ever heard of the Moth, the storytelling festivals, the Jonesboro Festival, we'll talk about that. These things, they just come in, to just getting a wide range of people, wide audience, bringing different cultures, different stories from here, but from all around the world. So the stories that we're working with tonight are situated here, for the most part, in North Carolina. And we're going to do it in 3 parts. First part is going to be a jack tale, and we'll talk a little bit about this. Does anybody know what a jack tale is? It's sort of jack tales. Yay! Then we're going to delve a little bit into sort of the history and mystery of Chatham County. So I was a kindergarten teacher for most of my work. Always wanted to be sort of a high school social studies teacher, so that's my chance to kind of do something. And then after that, we're going to do another North Carolina story, not a jack tale, but stories that come from the same sort of background. So I guess what is that background? What are these stories when we're talking about jack tales and Appalachian stories? Well, they go back actually hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. When we're talking about jack tales, they go back at least 600 years. And I think everybody here has heard of the most famous jack tale of all, right? Jack and the Beanstalk. Exactly, yeah. That actually is a version of a jack tale. And there's an Appalachian version of that too. They just call it Jack and the Bean Tree. And it's got some different stuff that happens in there. We're not doing that tonight, but maybe another time. So these tales go back, obviously, from England. A lot of them have an English root, some Scottish, some Irish. And, as people came over, and as they settled in, and they settled into the North Carolina mountains, the Beach Mountain area in particular, they brought these stories with them. And they told the stories, not like a show like this, but it's the stories that were told day to day while people are working, kind of, keeping morale up, just having fun, sometimes sharing lessons, sometimes not. Jack tales, maybe one of the greatest things about jack tales is that they have no redeeming value whatsoever. They're simply meant for entertainment. You're not going to find a moral, particularly you're not going to find a lesson. Jack rarely learns anything before going on to the next story. He just is what he is. And we came across jack tales from a man named Richard Chase. And he published a book in 1943 when he was working with part of the WPA project. He was out collecting stories. He was a folklorist. And he found himself up in the Beach Mountain area and started hearing these stories. And he went and heard stories and people talking to him. And he finally decided to collect these stories into this book called, appropriately enough, the Jack Tales. Just nice and simple. And the stories came from a set of a family. Council Harmon is sort of the big progenitor of these stories. And then his family over time perpetuated and kept telling the stories. By marriage, the Hicks family. Hicks family is probably the most famous North Carolina version. The North Carolina people that told these stories. Ray Hicks and Orville Hicks. You go online, you type in their names, you go to YouTube, you're going to find videos of them telling the stories. Ray Hicks was big in the Jonesboro storytelling circuit at the yearly festival. And Maud Long is another one. Donald Davis, who's sort of Donald Davis? Donald Davis was sort of a revivalist storyteller. He's a big storyteller around here. He has a big thing at Farrington every year that sells out. And that's where I approach the story from. I'm more of a revivalist. tail because I don't come by this naturally. I mean, in terms of like I didn't go out and huge mountain over the years as a mountain person. So I'm not as authentic, but I come at it by just passion and enjoyment. So Jack, let's go to Jack. Jack tails the way Richard Chase put him in, he had to clean him up. So, because it was an intended audience of children, for the most part. So he kind of sanitized some things and put some stuff together. When I do tell the story I'm going to tell for 2 kids, like to 5th graders, I also kind of modify it a bit. Tonight I'm not going to modify it too much. Because you're all adults, we can handle it. Right? But to illustrate kind of some of the sanitation, the first printed version of a jack tale came out in the 15th century. And it was a rhyming tale. It was called Jack and His Stepdame. Stepdame is a stepmother. What's the trope about stepmothers? Yeah, exactly. Wicked, evil, mean. And that's right in this story too. That's kind of the trope that goes all the way back. So Jack is really mistreated by his stepmother. And one day he's out, he's doing something for his father. He's watching sheep or something. And he shares his meager lunch with an old beggar who gives him 3 wishes. And so Jack's 3 wishes are, well, the first thing he wants is a bow and arrows that never miss. Second thing he wants is a pipe, a music pipe, that'll make anyone dance for as long as he plays it, how they hear it. Done. So then he thought a little bit. The third thing he wanted, well, he wanted a spell that would cause his stepdame, whenever she looked at him hatefully, to explosively fart. So you're not finding those in the Jack and Beanstalk stories, but that's really where it all started from. They were often bawdy, ranging on obscene a little bit. We're not going to get that far tonight. We're going to try to have some fun with the Jack tale. So the one I want to tell you is called Jack and the Varmints. And in this story, we kind of see all of Jack's characteristics come out. Things to know about Jack is that he's generally good-hearted. He doesn't really get a lot into anger or putting people down. He's very, very lazy and tries to get out of as much work as he can try to get out of. And he's got more than his share of good luck. And in this story, we'll see all of that happen, along with, you'll see some of where the stories from Old English folk tales and fairy tales come in. We'll see some of the English roots in the way that the story is unfolded. And hopefully we'll just have a good time learning it. So, let's give it a try. And let's see what happens. Jack and Varmints.
Could you talk just a little bit louder?
I sure can try. How's that? Yeah. Or you want to move up a little bit, or I can go over this a little bit. Can you hear on? Okay. We'll try to make that happen. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for asking that. I should have asked before if everybody could hear me okay. Yeah, do like this if I get low. Excellent. Thank you. My wife is there. She's going to make sure she. So one morning, Jack was out walking early in the morning, which was unusual. Because one thing that Jack hated was getting up in the morning. And every morning, his daddy had to come over there and say, Jack, you get on up now. Jack said, I don't want to get up. Jack, you better get up. I don't want to get up. Jack, if you don't get up, I'm going to come over there and hit you with a switch. And, every morning, his dad had threatened, I had to hit him with a switch just to get him up out of bed. So that's why it was really unusual to see Jack walking down the road toward town just right after the sun rose. And the reason he did that, well, his brothers, Will and Tom, they're his older brothers, and they had left the house. They were out in another settlement for some work. And Jack's daddy was just getting tired of seeing Jack just laying about the house all the time. So he told Jack if he wasn't going to go to work, he was going to give him some work to do, and he had a whole bunch of firewood that he wanted him to chop. And if there's something that Jack hated even more than getting up, he was doing any kind of work. So this morning he was out. He just decided to get out of there. He snuck out of the house. Got himself, before he left, got himself a little biscuit, put some sorghum on it, put it in his pocket, and he was just off down the road whistling, having kind of a nice morning, actually. And then he started getting hungry, so he had his biscuit there, and he sat down on the rock, and he just kind of was opened up. He pulled out his biscuit with the sorghum on it, and he was just about to enjoy eating it, when all these yellow jackets come buzzing around, dive bombing, going after that biscuit. God, he couldn't take a bite without a yellow jacket. Finally just got really angry. He saw there was this little plank just on the ground there. He picked up that plank and he went, swack! And then he kind of looked at what he did and he counted. He said, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I killed me 7 varmints with one slap. He was proud of himself. Well, so he ate up his biscuit real quick, and he's still carrying the plank. He's just loving it. He's kind of swinging that plank around. And as he's walking, he just comes up with this little song. He's just singing, 7 and a swag, 7 and a swag, God killed me, 7 with a swag, 7 with a swag. He was really proud. Well, as he's going by, he just passes by the blacksmith. He's on his way to town. Blacksmith is out on the porch, just kind of taking a rest break. And blacksmith says, howdy, Jack. And Jack says, well, howdy. And blacksmith says, what are you singing about there? And Jack says, well, you see this plank? Blacksmith says, yeah, I do. Jack says, well, I killed me 7 varmints with one swack. Blacksmith says, you did. Jack says, yeah, I sure did. Blacksmith says, well, Jack, you must be a pretty powerful fellow. Well, yeah, I guess I am. I want to make you something. How would you like a belt? Jack says, yeah, I'd like a belt real fine. So the blacksmith, he goes in and he makes him a belt. Does it all really nice, gets the leather, and then makes his belt, and then he gets his belt buckle. And he puts some words on there, some writing. It says, Big Man Jack killed 7 with one swack. Oh, Jack, he put that on, he felt even prouder than before. He's just going down that road, just kind of swinging this plank and singing that song. It's a pretty good song if anybody wants to sing with me. All right? He goes, 7 and a swag, 7 and a swag, God killed me, 7 with the swag, 7 with the swag. All right, we didn't have a lot of participation. Well, Jack is walking along and he comes across the king up on this big old white horse. And the king there stops and says, well, howdy, Jack. And Jack says, well, howdy, king. The king says, same as the blacksmith. Jack, what's that you're singing about? And Jack says, well, you see this plank? And King says, yeah, I do. And Jack says, well, I killed me 7 varmints with one swack. King says, no, you didn't. Jack says, yeah, I did. Look, says so right here on my belt. Big Man Jack killed 7 with one swack. The king says, Jack, you must be a pretty powerful fellow. Jack says, yeah, I guess I am. King says, I've been looking for a fellow like you. Jack says, uh-oh. What have you been looking for me for? King says, Jack, I've got me a varmint. Ooh, this is a bad one. It's a big old boar hog. Up on the mountain up there. Been running after my folk, running up and digging up their farms, eating their chicken, eating their sheep. Jack, everybody's afraid. My men won't go near this varmint. You got to take care of this for me. Jack says, oh, wait a minute. I don't know anything about taking care of no boar hog. King says, Jack, if you can kill 7 varmints with one swag, you can take care of this boar hog. And before Jack could say anything else, King pulled him out on his horse, rode him up the mountain to where the boar hog was being seen. Dumped Jack off, turned around his horse, and got out of there as fast as he can, calling over his shoulder, you killed that boar hog for me, and I'll pay you $1,000. Ooh, I know. Well, Jack had no intention of trying to meet up with that boar hog, so he figured he could just kind of get around on the other side, sneak down the road, maybe get out of there, before anyone could see him. So he started walking, but then, well, of course, he hears behind him this snorting guttural. Turns around and there's the big old tusks, drool just coming down, sweat coming off him, kind of like my sweat right now. And And Jack, well, he did pretty much what he was going to do. He started running. Which he hated even more than getting up in the morning or working. He just started running for all he was worth. And he ran and ran and ran. And that poor hog was chasing him. And Jack's running going, ah! And they're running and comes across the clearing. And in the clearing there's this little old shed with no roof. Yeah. So Jack, he runs into the shed and he jumps up to the top, grabs hold of the rafter and kind of hangs there. And the boar hog, he's following Jack and he's just running. He runs through the door and boom, smashes into the wall, kind of stuns himself for a minute. So Jack, he pulls himself over the side of the house, goes over to the door, closes it, and still holding the plank. Put that plank right there and wedge the door shut. And that boar hog was just in there, just a yelling and a screaming and a snorting, but he couldn't get out. So Jack, he figured this was a good time for him to get going. So he made off down the road, and he didn't notice the king was right there waiting. So Jack says, "Oh, hi, King." And King says, "Hey, Jack, did you take care of that boar hog?" And Jack says, "You know, I looked all over the place. I looked all over that mountain. I didn't see any boar hog." King says, "You didn't?" Jack says, "No, all I saw was just this little old pig. This little old baby pig just kind of kept coming to me, butting up on my legs, kind of bothering me. Got me a little irritated. So I just kind of picked him up and I threw him into this old shed with no roof." Jack says, King says, "Jack, I don't know that I believe you." Jack says, "Well, come on up, I can show you." Well, so they rode up to the shed, and sure enough, there was that boar hog just banging against the walls in the shed and just roaring away. King says, "Jack, that's that boar hog." Jack says, "It is." And so the king got his men, and they went up there, got 4 or 5 of his men, and they shot the boar hog. And they say that it made like 2 wagon loads of meat to feed the town. So it all worked out well for everybody. And so the king paid Jack $1,000. Well, King Jack says, "All right, King, thanks much. You know, I got to get going because, you know, I was really looking forward to doing some of this firewood my dad wants me to cut." And the king says, "Hold on there, Jack. You can't go just yet. Because I got me another barn that I need to take care of. So I'm going to take a quick pause. So you see, we got the things of threes with this story, just like how, you know, the 3 things are going to happen. And we see that Jack, along with being kind of lucky, is a bit of a trickster. And he can kind of think on the fly and figure things out as he's going along. So Jack says, "Another varmint? Listen, I got to get home." And King says, Jack, you got to do this for me. This one's worse than the other one. This is a unicorn." And Jack says, "A what?" And King says, "It's a unicorn, and it is just killing my people, and with that pointy horn it's got on there, and messing up all their livestock, and digging up all the farms. Oh, you got to take care of this varmint for me, Jack." And before Jack could say anything, you know, he grabbed him up, put him on the horse, rode up the other side of the mountain, dropped Jack off. He got off, and he took off as quickly as he could, yelling over his shoulder, "You take care of this unicorn for me, and I'll pay you $1,000. Well, you know, Jack had even less intention of trying to see this unicorn than he had with the boar hog. So he decided he would try to get himself out of there really, really quick. Well, guess what? That unicorn just showed up, right? He could hear him in the distance. He's just a snorting and a pawing. And he shows up there, and Jack, well, he decided to break his rule about working too hard. And he started running again, faster than the first time. And he ran, and the unicorn's right behind him. And he's running, and the unicorn's right there, just snuffing here. You can almost feel a little pinprick on his back there. Jack is going as fast as he can, and he's heading right toward this big old tree. And just it looked like the unicorn was about to just gore him in the back, he trips over a root. The unicorn flies over him and embeds his horn, smack, into that big old tree. Lucky Jack. Well, Jack always carried like 5, 6, 7, 10 penny nails in his pocket, which is one of the things he did. And so he picked up a rock and he took that horn while the unicorn was there struggling, and he kind of like bent the horn down and kind of put a little nail or two in there so that the unicorn could not get away. Because he wanted to get out of the way himself. Now remember, this was a bad unicorn. Okay? This is one of the parts that I take out when I'm telling the kids. Yeah. So, yeah, we don't do the unicorn. I had 5th grade girls very upset with that. Yeah. We turned it into a grizzly bear. That's right. But in this story, it's the unicorn. And so Jack, he gets down the road, gets heading down the mountain, figuring maybe he can get out of there before anybody else sees him or he sees the king, but the king's right there waiting for him. And the king says, Jack, you're back. Did you see that unicorn? And Jack says, well, no, king, I looked all over. I didn't see any unicorn. King says, you didn't? Jack says, no, the only thing I saw was just this little bull, this little tiny bull. It just had like one horn. And it kept on coming around me, kind of wanting to play, kind of poking me with its horn. Got me kind of mad. So I just kind of picked him up and I just kind of shoved him horn first into a tree. Kind of left him there. King says, Jack, I don't know that I believe you here. And Jack says, well, I can show you. So off they went. Sure enough, there was the unicorn. Just stuck to that tree. We'll do it this way. So while they were there watching, I'll modify it a little bit. While they were there watching, right? And then the corn was stuck in the tree. The unicorn kind of wiggled enough that part of it just broke off. And you know unicorn horns grow. That the unicorn's horn just kind of broke off, and he made off down to a whole other territory, went maybe over as far as Vermont or someplace. And so he was never seen those parts again. And so the king paid Jack another $1,000. Well, Jack was feeling real good. $2,000 was more money he'd seen ever. And he was ready to get out there. He says, King, thank you, King. I'm really glad that we got together here, but I need to go. I really need to start cutting this firewood for my daddy. And King says, let's see, 1, 2, here's the third. King said, hold on, Jack. You can't go yet. I got one more barn I need you to take care of. Jack says, what? No, not one more. What is it this time? King says, Jack, this is a lion. A lion? Yeah, big old lion came down from Tennessee or somewhere. I don't know how it got, but it's just this big old mean lion, and it's just been killing my people and killing all their livestock and digging everything up. Jack, you got to take care of this farmer. Well, he didn't give Jack any time. He just put him up on his horse, went up again on the other side of the hill, threw him down there, took his horse, turned him in the other direction, got out of there as quick as he could, and he said, and Jack, if you take care of this varmint, I'm gonna pay you $1,000. Oh yeah. Maybe. Well, Jack, and this guy, he was even more scared than before, because he had heard, just how mean lions can be. Not a lot of lions in Beach Mountain, North Carolina. So he just had no intention of getting anywhere near this lion. So he starts just kind of sneaking off down the road, trying to get out of the way, and that lion springs up right in front of him. Big old thing, big yellow teeth, the whole thing, whole roar. Well, Jack didn't even run this time. He just stood frozen a minute. There was a tree right over there. He just jumped through that tree. He probably jumped up 35 feet in the air. He kind of missed the branch the first time, but he caught it coming back down. And then he just climbed up on that tree, and he just hung there for dear life. And that lion is down there in the tree, and he's just kind of looking up at Jack. And Jack is looking down at the lion, and the lion, well, he's just patient because he knows Jack's got nowhere to go. He kind of takes his claws, and he's just clawing at the tree, and now then takes about 6, 8 inches of the tree trunk each time. Just kind of playing a little bit. Finally, the lion just kind of yawns, lays himself down by the base of the tree there, and he goes to sleep. He figures Jack will come down sometime. Well, Jack is thinking, all right, this is the chance. So he starts climbing as carefully as he can, down the tree, but not careful enough. Because he did notice he happened to step right on the dead limb, fell down and landed smack on that lion's back. The lion jumps up, roaring, "Roar!" And Jack's going, "Ah!" And he's grabbing onto the mane, and that lion doesn't know what's going on, and he starts running. He's running down the road toward town, and the lion's going, "Roar!" Jack's going, "Ah!" And they're just going and going. They come to the town, they come right around the circle, big old courthouse in the circle. And they just are driving around, running around that circle, and the king is there, and he sees Jack, and he says, "Jack, you're gonna die." And he gets his man, he says, "Jack, man, shoot that lion, but don't hit Jack." And his soldiers, they took a beat and go, boom! Okay, can't change this. And the lion is shot and goes down. And Jack goes tumbling off the lion and is rolling over 3, 4, 5 times in the road. And the king comes up. King runs up to Jack and says, "Jack! Jack, you're alive! You're alive!" And Jack stands up and brushes himself off and says, "Now, what did you go and do that for?" King says, "Jack, that lion was gonna kill you, was gonna eat you." Jack said, "No, it wasn't." King said, "Wasn't?" Jack says, "No, I was taming him for you." King says, "You were?" He said, "Yeah, I got to thinking, how fine you would look, on that line, riding him, and in parades and such. So, I was taming him for you. I was going to give him to you as a present." King says, well, Jack, I'm sorry, I didn't know." Jack says, "Well, King, lion taming is pretty hard work." King says, "Well, yeah, I guess it is, I guess I ought to pay you $1,000 for taming that lion." And the king gave Jack $1,000. And then the king says, "Well, Jack, that's about all the varmints I got here now, so I know you want to get home and do that firewood, so you best be on your way. Thank you very much." And Jack says, "Now, wait just a minute. Now, what was it that you kind of wanted me to do with that lion in the first place?" Well, King says, "Well, I wanted you to kill it." And Jack says, "Well, it's dead, ain't it?" And King says, "Well, yeah, I guess I owe you $1,000 for killing the lion." And so the king paid Jack another $1,000. And then Jack, he's counting his money. He's going, "Well, thank you, King. I'm going to go on home now, but you got any more varmints, call someone else." And he kind of puts that money in his pocket and he headed off for home. And I hear that he's still living pretty good off the money that he made that day. Still hasn't done any work, but still having a good old time. And that is just about all there is to that story. I got a little jumbled up there in the middle, but I'm tripping a little bit, but thanks, I wouldn't like that. No? These stories, they're meant to entertain and to be a little silly, a little ridiculous, and I think that's a good example, of a Jack tale. There's a lot of them around, as I said, you can find them online, books. Basically Jack is an everyman. In the stories, he's anywhere from about 14 years old to maybe 30-ish or so, kind of depending on the tale. Sometimes he wins the girl, but not a lot of those kind of stories. So now we're going to change gears. Right? We're going to move to Chatham County. I'm going to use my little binder here. By the way, it's the same binder I often use to do weddings and eulogies. So if anyone's in the market, but. So, Chatham County, just like any place, has its legends, its myths, and got online searching around, and I found two that I'd like to share with you all today. There's resources, like to tell my resources. So some of the resources that I've used, well, there's a folklorist in the area. His name is Dan Sellers, and he's done a lot of work on folklore, Chatham County folklore. So I kind of listened to his thing. He actually did a little presentation at the Combine the Mill. They do kind of a storytelling thing once a month now. And he was there doing one of those things a bit. WRL.com, North Carolina Ghosts, the Albemarle Plantation, of course, and NCpedia. NCpedia is a good place to go to find things about North Carolina. So what I'd like to do is just kind of go through these two things with you. I'm going to kind of do a little bit of instruction. My whole point tonight is to do a little bit of kind of background information to the story, kind of share a little bit about the state, about our background, history, our culture, and hopefully just have a little fun with it at the same time. So let's find out about this first legend. So Chatham County, we're kind of smack in the heart of Piedmont. We're 100 miles from the ocean. It's not the place that you usually think of as a hotbed for mermaid activity. And yet Chatham was once just the place to see them. True story. So let's find out where. Back over where the Haw River and the Deep River meet, right, to form the mouth of the Cape Fear. That's where you'll see a spot that is known as Mermaid Point. Go back a little bit in time, around 1740, there were 4 Scotsmen, and they got together and they bought up a lot of large tracts of land right there in the area, and they made a town. They called it Lockville. Now in those days, the river, it was just teeming with Atlantic sturgeon. Anyone heard of Atlantic sturgeon? Yeah, so they're like this kind of a strange, it's an ancient fish, right? Really strange looking fish. Spends most of its life in the ocean, but it migrates to freshwater to spawn. And so right there, from Mermaid Point, the Cape Fear, it flows down to around Wilmington. Finally, it kind of joins the sea right near Bald Head Island. So that's how the sturgeon would come down the river, do their spawning, head back up into the ocean. And the thing about sturgeon is that they made good eating, and their eggs were about as highly prized as caviar. Okay, so this meant that there was money to be made. So a little while goes by, and this man named Ambrose Ramsey, this catches his attention. And he figures if there's money to be made, then that means there's money to be spent. And he thinks he knows just the way to get in on that action. He opens a tavern. Kind of like opening a winery, right? Yeah, it's just the money flows in.
Right.
Yeah.
So he opens that tavern, and business was good. And as the Revolutionary War starts ramping up, it got even better. It got so good, in fact, that he put in a mill right nearby, right on the river. And I'm going to do a little like a commercial break here with that mill, because incidentally, this mill, it actually played a role in the war. So there was the Battle of Guilford Courthouse. And, okay, awesome. Guilford Courthouse. And Cornwallis's army, they lost a lot of soldiers, about 25%. And they were in retreat. And they retreated to the tavern and the mill. And it became something of a turning point of the war at that time. So I'm going to put this up here. I don't have my multimedia presentation today, but I do have a print of the marker of this thing, the Cornwallis and then the Deep River. So I'll put it up here, put it here, and people can, if you want to look at that, that's fine, but we're going to veer back to Mermaid. So Ramsey's Tavern sat right by the banks of the Deep River. It was just a bit upstream of where it joined with the Haw. So there was a long white sandbar in the middle of the channel where the rivers met, and as the war ramped up, soldiers began to visit the tavern regularly. And it was right around this time that the sightings began. People told of beautiful mermaids who would sit on the sandbar at night, combing their long hair in the moonlight. People walking home from the tavern would see them laughing, singing, playing, splashing in the water. Some say that they would lure men in with their songs, but then disappear below the surface if anyone tried to call out or approach them. It's said that more than one soldier tried to swim out to mermaids just to be left empty-handed, soaked, blood-stained, and jeered at by their companions. Now, as for why the mermaids would leave the sea and swim so far inland, well, the explanation is obvious. Mermaids are very, very vain creatures. And they swam up from the coast to wash the salt water from their hair, so it would be more shiny and beautiful. I'll do that every day. And so the area actually came to be known as Mermaid Point. In fact, until about 4 or 5 years ago, remember, there was a restaurant, the Mermaid Point restaurant, right there. It was kind of capitalizing on this a little bit, but it's out of business now, unfortunately, because I'd be there in a minute. Now, whether it means anything, you know, that the people always seem to see the mermaids on the way home from the tavern, and not so much on the way there, I guess that's just open to interpretation. But sadly, the town of Lockville didn't make it over time. It lasted a while, but Moncure and Haywood eventually, took over what business there was to be had. Ramsey's Tavern stood until the 19th century. It was destroyed in a flood, and the sandbar was submerged. And then dams and locks began to be built along Cape Fear, including the Lockville Dam, right there where the mill used to be. The Lockville Dam in 1922, a brick and concrete structure. And so mermaids have not been seen since 7 o'clock. But and this is according to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, that at my last look, it looks like it's still happening. The dam is scheduled to be removed. It no longer produces power. It was breached in 2023. It blocks critical habitat for the federally endangered Cape Fear shiner and limits its migration to suitable habitat found downstream. Its removal will reestablish this critical habitat for the Cape Fear shiner, the Atlantic pigtail mussel, and other aquatic organisms, including maybe, just maybe, mermaids. So stay tuned. We'll see what happens. Now, the next one is one I'm sure people around here have heard of. This is the most famous site in Chatham County as far as sort of, mysterious occult stuff goes. The Devil's Tramping Ground, right? Stand up, yeah. Sorry, it's actually right near here, near Silent City. If you go out, you go out, take a right on 64, go a few miles there, take a left on, is it pronounced Rives, Chapel Church Road? It's spelled R-I-V. Is it Reeves or Rives? Is it Reeves? Okay. I couldn't find the spelling, the pronunciation. Yeah. So you turn on Reeves Chapel Church Road, keep going for a little while, and you're finally going to come across, wait for it, Devil's Tramping Ground Road. The GPS will take you right there. And that's where the site is. So this was over in Bear Creek, right? It's in a pine forest near Harper's Crossroad. It's the Devil's Tramping Ground. So what is the Devil's Tramping Ground? It's a circular, barren patch with 2 paths. One leading in and one leading out. Where nothing grows, which animals avoid. And it said that objects left within its boundaries either vanish or they're destroyed. It's known for eerie noises, weird lights, strange happenings, just overall a very spooky The legend claims that it's the devil's own spot. On any given night at midnight, he stomps in on one path, tramps around the circle, plotting evil deeds, generally reflecting on life, getting in some cardio. Thank you for laughing. When he's done, he leaves by the second path with plans resolved and then, I guess, an updated Fitbit. So, the legend itself goes back about 300 years. Okay, the first mention in print was in 1882. And there are a lot of stories about people's experiences with the transit car. I mean, a lot. When I get online, you go to this, there's just all kinds of stuff. People's testimonials about they went and what a horrible, horrific, scary time it was, or the other side of that, how it was, pretty much a nothing. Depends on the story and who went. But I just want to share two stories with you here, two that I like. In the 1800s, a man named John Carter decided he was not going to let any spooky stories scare him off. He built a cabin less than a mile from the circle, where he saw fertile soil and opportunity. So he moved in with his wife, Mary, their two, sturdy sons. Everyone had sturdy sons in those days. And they set about clearing the trees for farming. And for a while, everything seemed fine. But then, it started with noises. Strange sounds, inarticulate, guttural, then rising to a clamor that came from no living creature. Then, the whispers. Now maybe it was just the wind sighing through the pines, but they seemed to swirl around their ears and into their heads. Not quite words, but almost words that somehow said, "Go away." But they stayed. The dog took to spending most of its time hiding under the porch. Chickens vanished from their coop without any sign of how. And one morning, John found his prized milk cow dead, her body untouched, but her eyes staring wide open like she'd been scared to death. It was right about this time that Mary was kind of reconsidering her choices. She started begging John to leave. "There's something out there, John. Something unnatural." John, he was a stubborn sort. He insisted, "There's nothing out there other than wild dogs, bears, and your imagination." Or worse than that. And then one night in November, the family sat inside by the fire, listening to the wind howl, when there came a knock at the door. Hard, deliberate, like someone pounding with their fists. John grabbed his rifle, flung open the door, but there wasn't a soul inside. And the wind had stopped its howl, leaving a silence as heavy as stone. And then he heard footsteps, slow, almost rhythmic. The hair on the back of his neck stood up as the steps grew louder, and as he stared out into the darkness, he saw eyes, red eyes, glowing like hot coals, staring at him from the direction of the circle. He slammed the door shut, bolted, told the family to pack what they would carry. By morning, the Carters were gone. Their cabin left to rise. True story? True-ish. One more. boys from Chapel Hill, because of course, decided to spend the night in the circle. They thought it was a great joke. They pitched their tents right in the middle, laughing and scoffing the whole time. And you know, college kids know how to scoff, even then. But as the night wore on, you know, their bravado began to fade as the woods grew quiet. This was not one of those peaceful quiets. No, this was a deathly quiet. You know, the kind that makes your skin crawl. They piled wood on the fire, and though it burned, it gave out no heat. And so they clutched themselves as they shivered in the dark. Then, right about midnight, one of the boys gasped and pointed toward the edge of the firelight, his face frozen in fear. The others turned to see a shape, tall, thin, moving slowly around the circle. And they did not wait to see anymore. As one, they leaped up and they ran, leaving their tents and supplies behind them, but they actually returned the next day to find the campsite destroyed. Tents shredded, firewood scattered, and strange, hoof-like footprints embedded in the dirt. So, supernatural sight or natural phenomenon? Does the devil really use this spot as his personal running track? I don't know. Maybe. Soil samples taken over the years do show some anomalies, but like high salt content, but nothing that is high enough to make it so that nothing can grow. Though it's surrounded by normal vegetation, however, attempts to plant anything on the path through the circle have all failed. But also, the circle has been shrinking over time, going from about 50 feet diameter to about 25 feet or so today. Who knows? Some people think that maybe the mystical energies are waning, you know, or maybe the devil went and got himself up on the top. Could be. All I know is that after I wrote the Peloton joke, I got hit by 6 or 7 chiggers and wrenched my back. So I might be playing with some fire. But there are other people that have other theories about what the circle is. The devil's tramping the devil, you know, using it as the main big one. But some people actually believe that it was an ancient Native American meeting place. It was used for feasts and for dancing around the circle. And that's why nothing grows there, because it's just been stomped down. Now, others think that the site is actually the burial place of a great Indian chief who was killed in a fierce battle. And so the circle stays clear because the spirits are still in mourning. Now, there are some other people who think that this is an alien landing zone. Yeah, now that could explain, you know, the reports of lights in the sky, the eerie noises, and the General Assembly. Ooh, sorry. And there's actually a more recent theory, you're going to like this one, that's come about, is that the site is actually the anchor of a Magdalene crystal column of energy. So it's a point of divine feminine energy on earth. That's what we are. You know, it's a nice 180 from the whole devil. But if you want to check it out for yourself, like I said, it's about 25 minutes down the road. The current owners, it is on private land, but they have a website. The original devilstrampingground.com. You go on there, you can book overnight stays, just $15 a person to camp out. They got all kinds of things. And on the events tab, if you click on the events tab there, it's going to take you to a link for here's my multimedia, for the Chatham County Vortex Paracon. This is a group, and in October, just before Halloween, the 25th and 26th, they are hosting a paranormal festival that's being planned on that site. So you can go on, you can get tickets, we can look at that, pass it around, and if you do go, let us know what you find out. Thank you very much. sorry, is everybody okay still? One more, last one. One more story. So this is also a story from the mountains up in our area, North Carolina and South Carolina. Kind of share this story. You know, stories are meant to be fun, but they reflect, people's lives and hard scrabble lives. Humor, a lot of stories that were not really meant for kids, they were meant for adults. Sometimes it was just for the men folk. They kept them away from the women too, but that kind of depended, on the story. But so this story is also found in a collection by Richard Chase called Grandfather Tales. So after collecting all the Jack Tales, he went around and collected just a lot of other stories. This he published in about 1948. We'll see. You'll see a lot of the same components, kind of just the folktale storytelling structure on this. I read it in a book and also learned it from a storyteller. I'm sorry, I have to remember her name. I wrote it down. 1 second. Barbara, I have it here. Yeah, Barbara Freeman. I was into that. Jack Tale, also the first Jack Tale I thought I learned from a storyteller named Jackie Torrance. She's a wonderful storyteller. And so is Barbara Freeman. She's still around. Jackie Torrance has passed away, but Barbara lives up in the Asheville area. So this is kind of a mishmash version of her story and the one that's in the book here. And it's called Dry Fry. Oh, I sometimes wonder if I should even tell this story about dry fry because it seems like just about everybody knows dry fry. Right? In fact, maybe to save time, is there anyone here who does not know dry fry? Who is not real? Oh, okay, louder. Thank you. I'll do that again. Is there anybody here who does not know dry fry? Who hasn't heard of it? Oh, wow. All right. Sorry. Okay. That's what I thought too. All right. Well, all right. Before I tell you about dry fry, let me see if I can tell a little story to maybe. I had two. I'll just say one little story to jog your memory. Okay. Well, so Dry Fry, he was an old preacher man. Okay. But mostly what he ever preached for was the collection plate and all the fried chicken he could eat. Dry Fry just loved fried chicken. He was always getting any picnic and getting himself invited over for dinner. If they had fried chicken, he was there. Well, there was this one time. I'll tell you both parts. There was this one time, Dry Fry was at a picnic, right, at a church picnic, and he was just eating, and he was jawing so fast. So anything he liked almost as much as fried chicken, it was hearing these old boys talk. Not like me. And he was just jawing and talking so fast that his false teeth just flew right out of his mouth and landed in a mud hole, sunk right there. So everybody, they felt bad for him, but nobody wanted to dig in there and get his teeth pulled, And then this little kid, little Ginny Johnson, she had nightmare. So she went over to the picnic basket and she got a big piece of fried chicken. And she tied a string to it. Okay? And then she took that and she dangled it over the mud. And sure enough, those false teeth, they just came jumping up and they just latched onto that chicken. And then all she had to do was just fry him off and clean him up with some lemonade, gave him back to Dry Fry, and he was as good as new. All right, so some of you don't remember. Are you starting to remember him a little bit now, or not yet? All right, one. Okay, just to help you remember him. So there's another time, Dry Fry, when he was in a bad mood. He was complaining to another man there in the community that someone had stolen his bicycle. He didn't have any way to get the meetings, go anywhere, and he was just going on and on complaining about his lost bicycle. And then the man says, "Well, now Dry Fry, just listen. If you're that upset about your bicycle, I'll tell you what you should do. You're gonna go to that next meeting, get yourself there, and I want you to stand up there in front of the congregation and just start talking about those commandments. Take them whichever way, take them in order, whichever way you want to go. But tell you what, when you get to the one that says, 'Thou shalt not steal,' you just stop it and just fix everybody with a steely gaze. And the one who breaks out into the biggest bead of sweat, that'll be the one that stole your bicycle." dry fry. He thought this was a great idea. So he got himself rested up, and he made it to the next meeting, and he got there in front of the whole group, and he just started in on those commandments. And he took that last one and he put it in there first, and he took that first one and he put it in wherever he wanted. But then when he got to the one that said, "Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife," he remembered where he'd left his place. Now you're starting to remember. So we can get into the story now. So here's what happened. So one night, Dry Fry, he's at a farmer's house. He finagled himself, dinner invitation, because it was just some great fried chicken. And then Dry Fry, he was just there eating the fried chicken and just eating it so fast that a chicken bone got caught in his throat. And he sat there for a moment, and then he just keeled over, dead. All right, say, "Aww." That's a sad time. Well, imagine how the farmer felt. He stood there, he just sat there and he stared for a second and just said, "Mommy, ain't no one gonna believe that Dry Fry can't put down a piece of fried chicken. Why they're gonna think I killed him, and they're gonna hang me for murder. Oh, I gotta get rid of him." So he picks old Dry Fry up and he kind of gets him out and drags him a bit down the road and up the hill a little bit. Comes to this big bush, just big, strong, sturdy bush. And he kind of manages to sort of get Dry Fry so he's kind of hanging into the bush. Sees he's okay there, and then he just kind of dusts off his hand and just went back home, tried to see if he can finish what was left of his dinner. Well, it was a beautiful night, right? There was a big old full moon. And then of course there were these lovers out and about. And two of these lovers, they were just walking down the road from the other side, stopping every now and then to play smacky mouth and that kind of stuff. And then they were walking along there. She stopped and she said, "Hey, look, it looks like up there in that bush, there's someone just standing there." And he says, "Oh, I'll tell you, I know what that is. That's one of those highway robbers. Yeah, he's just waiting there for us to go by so he can come out and take all our stuff. Well, we got to get him before he gets us." So they reached down and they picked up some stones. And they start chucking those stones and throwing them. And one of them hits Dry Fry and he goes down onto the ground. So they run up there to the bush to see who it is. "Law me," they say. "It's old Dry Fry." Because everybody knows old Dry Fry. "Oh no, we've done killed him. And they're gonna hang us for murder, and we're so young. But we gotta get rid of him." And so working together, they kind of lift him up and they bring him up the hill, kind of up the incline, up the road, and they're walking for a bit and they come across, it looks like a cornfield. There's a corn house with a corn crib right next to it, right? And so they managed to get Dry Fry kind of propped up against the corn house, kind of standing there. Wasn't too hard. It was getting a little easier because rigor mortis had started setting. But they kind of get him up there, and then they go off down the road back home, playing Huggy Bear and Kiss a Face all the time. So the next morning, the farmer who owned that corn crib, he got up. He got up early before the sun rose, splashing cold water on his face. People had been stealing from him. He wasn't going to let it happen anymore. So he's out there getting ready and looks out the window and he sees like someone right there by his corn crib. He lifts up the window and says, Hey, you get away from there or I'm going to shoot." Not so. "Listen up now. You get out of there or I'm going to blast you." And he picks up his gun, aims it out the window, boom! Down goes Dry Fry. Well, farmer runs out there to see who it is. "Well, me. It's old Dry Fry," because everybody knows old Dry Fry. "Oh, I done killed them and now they're going to hang me for murder. Oh, I got to get rid of him. Well, it was daylight. He knew he had to wait until the sunset. So he just kind of got dry fry into the cornhouse there and then just waited for the night. And then when it got good and dark, he went and got himself, one of his big burlap sacks, like we all have, right? Big burlap sack, and he went and he kind of stuffed dry fry into the sack and kind of lifted him up over his shoulder, started on down the road. Figured maybe he could find a place kind of in the woods that just kind of set him down. Well, so as he's coming down the road one way, up just over the hill on the other side, come these two rogues, two thieves. They'd been out that night stealing. And they each had a sack filled with hog meat. And they see the farmer down there, and they get scared. They're going to get caught. So they drop their sacks and they run off on the side of the woods. They run in deep enough so that they can't see it, and they hope nobody can see them. Right? So the farmer, he's coming along with his sack, and he comes around the bend, and he sees these two sacks lying right there in the road. So he puts down his sack and he goes over and he opens one and he sees that it's full of hog meat. Well, so right about then he figured that a sack full of hog meat was a better deal than a sack full of dry fry. So he just made a little trade. And then he took his sack of hog meat and he went on back. Well, so after a while, right, the two thieves, they come out of the woods. They're just fussing at each other and arguing about whose fault it was and why they went down the road instead of cutting through the woods in the first place. And they're sure that their sacks are gone, but they see them laying right there. Right there in the path. So they just count their lucky stars. They pick up their sacks and they go on home. They get to the meat house and they put the sacks up on the meat hooks. Remember, it was a hard scramble life. And they go on home. They go back into the house. They go to bed. Well, early the next morning, one of the wives of the thieves, she comes out. She's got her butcher knife. Goes to the meat house. Gonna get some meat to cook up for breakfast. Right. So she's standing there with the knife, just kind of looking at one sack, looking at the other, kind of making her decision. And then she takes her butcher knife and she puts a big old rip in one of the sacks, and out comes old dry fry. And she went, ah! And she started running out, knocked down the wall of the meat house, ran into the house, just pulled the door right off its hinges. She was sort of scared. And the two thieves, they come running out to see what the commotion's about. And they look and they say, Mommy, it's old dry fry, because everybody knows old dry fry. And they said, oh, with our trouble with the law, why they're going to think we killed him. They're going to hang us for murder for sure. We got to get rid of him. Well, it turns out they had kind of in the back, they had this horse that they had in the pen. And this was no ordinary kind of horse. I mean, this horse had steam coming out of its ears and its eyes and its nose and all four hooves at once. And they managed to get this horse into the corral. Yeah. And then they find like an old beat up saddle and a little bit of a bridle. And they get on the horse and then they gather up dry fry. And they get him up into the saddle and they tie him there and just kind of get him so his hands are on the pommel, put a big old hat on his head. And then they rear back and they give that horse such a whack. You could hear it across the field. And that horse took to just running as fast as it could down the road. And these two rogues are right behind him, just running, yelling, help, help, horse thief, horse thief. That man stole their horse, stop them. And when people heard this, they're running out and they're picking up rocks and they're chucking rocks. And some of them took out their guns and they're shooting. And that horse, he jumped over that only fence in town and went up into the mountains, up in the hill. Well, they say that horse has been seen from the Black Mountains of Asheville, North Carolina, to the White Mountains of New Hampshire. In fact, to this day, people will be out minding their business, doing stuff, having a picnic, or maybe in the winter, going snow skiing, and they'll see something go by, kind of the corner of their eye. And everywhere, you can just hear people say, "Mommy?" Now, doesn't that look like old dry fry? Because everybody knows dry fry. Hopefully you liked some of that. I hope it was good. Thank you so much for coming. This is my first grown-up thing in a while. I used to do quite a lot. Kids now. If you are alive, this has been in my family for 4 or 5 days. And it doesn't like to be empty. You'd like to put something in there, but you don't feel compelled to. Thank you so much for coming and have a good night. Thank you.